All right, we're live.
Cool. I'm running this call, I guess.
These ones I think.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. Sorry. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second dev call. We're hoping to sort of grind out a few things today. Does everyone have the agenda?
I did not post it here yet.
Let me paste that in the chat. I also need the agenda.
Okay, I've just dropped the link into the chat.
Cool. Amazing. Thank you. Awesome. So there's a couple of things to cover today, not too much. But first and foremost, anybody new on the call? Jonathan, if you can figure out how to talk, Jonathan, feel free to just jump in and because everyone else on the call knows each other. So I think jumping right in, we cut 0.8.0 last week, which was very exciting. It was a lot of work getting our Go module transition figured out, getting our update service figured out. Rob, have you had a chance to play with it at all? I know you downloaded and we fixed our archives that now they don't have Casey's hard drive path as part of the archive directory. Thanks, Casey, for doing that.
With the actual update service?
Yeah, Rob, do you have a chance to play with it at all?
No, I haven't played with the update service at all yet. I actually found time to read through the RFC finally.
Amazing. This is open source working the right way. Totally not necessary that you played with it, but I'm glad to hear that you got 0.8.0 up and running. We are going to be cutting and sort of like moving right along. We are going to be cutting 0.8.1 very, very soon, probably at the end of today, just to fix a bug that we found in setup, which is a very important code path if you're just getting started with query. To share a little bit of the backstory around this, so we depend on Go IPFS. IPFS now loads plugins, and their plugin syntax has gotten much more sophisticated. One of the issues is that the default configuration specifies a part of IPFS that is now loaded as a plugin. And so you have to be very careful to load all of the plugins before you try to parse any configuration, which would have been totally fine with the exception of and so we have tests for all of this. We have a test that runs an integration test and checks for that setup works properly. But our entire test suite can only load the plugins once per running process. So when we start up the test suite, we have to load all the plugins, and then we can run all of our tests, which meant that when that setup test was running, it already has all the plugins and wasn't able to catch the error. So at some point, I filed an issue around this. We're gonna have to figure out how to test that aspect. There could be a number of ways of doing it. We could sort of run that test before doing any other tests, but infamously in writing Go tests, they run in parallel, and so it's very difficult to sort of figure out which one should run first. The other thing we do is just like actually run like a shell script based test anything protocol test that just confirms that thing operates properly.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm getting a message from someone who's trying to join JW.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Let him in.
Oh, hey.
Does that work?
Yeah, I think he's here.
Cool.
Jeremy, welcome. Can you hear us okay? Can you hear us okay, Jeremy? No, we'll see. Oh.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah. Hello.
Hi. Yeah, I can hear you. I'm James.
James. Oh my gosh, I've been calling you Jeremy for how long?
I was oh no, Jeremy.
Jeremy. It's like the one time you really can't get somebody's name wrong, like the first time you say hello to them. Hi James. Thank you so much for your pull request contributing Storybook code.
Yeah, no problem. It's a lot of fun. Just learning and excited to collaborate.
Amazing. It's really appreciated. And at some point we should totally, I was really appreciative. I hopefully you saw we did get it merged actually sort of like an hour ago, just before this call. I had to leverage a funny thing in GitHub where I'm actually pushing to your fork of our code, which was like a really weird, I didn't realize that I could do that, but It was to make sure that our rebase, we had to just deal with some rebase conflicts based on.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll remember next time.
No, it's all good. And actually, I think we should totally do at some point, like do a session on rebasing, just to make sure that it's, because it's something that comes up all the time with people like asking about rebasing, and like the sort of like, because everybody has a little bit different sort of etiquette around how they do things. Like there's this whole idea of like a Git flow model, which a lot of projects use, where they will not actually merge into master, they'll merge into a branch called dev. And then there's another version that we use, which is traditionally you fork and then create a branch on your own repository, and then try to merge that branch instead of the master of your fork. There's a lot. Git's complicated and big, and there's many ways to use it. But at some point, if you have any interest, I'd be happy to sort of like go through and just chat through our entire sort of process and talk about how rebasing works in that sense.
Yeah, sounds like it'd be productive.
Yeah, maybe we could throw some of that at the end of this call. But cool. I think, yeah, we were just chatting about, here's the link to the notes for the call. But I guess, yeah, first and foremost, since you're new, James, do you want to, it's here to sort of meet the people on the call? We could do introductions now. We actually have some new people. Jonathan, I don't know if your mic is working, but if it is, I hope so. It'd be great to hear you. But
can you hear
yeah.
me? Okay, there you go.
Amazing. Okay, cool. So why don't we start with introductions? I'll just your name and favorite color. And I'll call them out based on order, but I see Rico and then Jonathan.
Cool. So I'm Rico Gardafe, Query employee, and I've been working with Brendan to organize this and the Query user calls, where we focus a little bit more on the user experience and surfacing issues and things related to that. But I work in New York with Brendan and Casey and Dustin.
Hey, my name is Jonathan. I work with, I started computer programming and working with the Knowledge House. I graduated from that coding boot camp, and now I'm on to help, I guess, with the Windows side of Query and just like working and developing with that. My favorite color is green.
Amazing. All right. Now I see Dustin and then James.
All right, I was muted. I'm Dustin. I'm a developer working on Query in New York, and just kind of handling all the stuff that isn't working or not working well enough. Favorite color today, I would say blue. Let's do that.
All right, so I'm James. I'm here in Brooklyn, just an open source collaborator trying to learn more about React Storybook and all sorts of cool stuff that your team seems capable to, and willing to help me learn. So that's kind of why I'm here. But my background is more in communications, and I started a project 3 years ago. It was a company then. We've open sourced everything since then. And now it's called Create, CRE8. I can talk more about that another time. I'm really happy to be here, and my favorite color is purple today.
Excellent choice. I think purple's a delightful color. I see Remfrox and Rob.
Hi, everybody. My name is Casey. I work at Query with these people who maybe if they wave in the background, you can see them. And let's see, my favorite color is green. And yeah, I'm super pumped to meet you in person, James. Yeah, we're really pumped about the contributions that you're making. So keep on keeping on.
Thanks for saying that.
I'm Rob. I have nothing to do with Query other than interested in it, and I am a software engineer, float around as a consultant. I work on a lot of software projects, a lot of open source stuff, and try and sometimes help people write better docs.
Amazing. I introduced myself. I'm Brendan, 95. I work at Query. My favorite color is sandalwood, which, yeah, irritates Casey to no end. It's great. Anyways, so nice to meet all of you. Thank you so much for coming out. Yeah, particularly Jonathan, James, it's like super exciting to be able to like, there's no question that you can't ask. We're very, very pumped to like help spread knowledge and learn together. And so thank you for showing up. That's half the battle. And we'll make sure that if you have questions that they get answered. Cool. So I think with that, we had a schedule to chat through a bunch of issues around our front end, but I think we'll sort of punt those to later because Kelsey will be joining us in a different call. So I think that we can jump straight to React Storybook talk and talk through some of our goals for what that project looks like and give it some scope. And maybe James give you a second to ask any questions. But if you have any interest, James, in just like talking through the PR that you filed and then what your next steps are, I think we're on a pretty good sync there.
Yeah, so you basically wrote it up, gave me a step-by-step process. I haven't gotten to the second pull request yet. It seems pretty straightforward. I'm sure I'll have more specific questions. Generally though, Storybook, it seems like it's just a great way to iterate on components in isolation, so you don't have to, mess with the production build. And we started with a button, but there's a list of components that if you're interested, you can start there or add whatever. It's pretty simple thus far, at least. And I don't really have any experience other than just getting started with Query. So I don't know. I'm not the one to give the rundown, but yeah, that's my experience so far. It's pretty straightforward.
That's perfect. Yeah. And so to sort of like, from simple beginnings, I think we're going to go to some like really fun heights with Storybook. And I think I wanted to take some time just to talk through why we even started on the project in the first place. And so to sort of connect a couple of train cars here, we've recently shipped 0.8.0 of the Query backend, which is our Go binary. And that does it's basically like the Git side of Git and GitHub. And we have a whole bunch of new features that have sort of, the front end and the back end have we've allowed them to diverge a bit, quite intentionally, because we've just shipped some new features in the back end that we don't fully know how we want to surface in the front end. And I think this is kind of an ongoing conversation in open source when you sort of cross the user interface boundary. Is like, how do you have a meaningful discussion as an open source project around refactoring user interfaces? And that's something that we're going to have to be, that's the big project that we're hoping to take on this summer, is like understanding how can we create a really great user experience on our front end using our command line, or using our sort of GUI or user interface in a way that tracks nicely with the backend, has as much feature parity as possible, but is also like done in a way that is sort of compartmentalized and manageable in the way that open source works. And so Casey and I worked together a number of months ago and sort of sketched out this React Storybook project, and haven't been able to get to it. We've been hoping to sort of like ship code against this because we knew that it would be super helpful. But we've got other stuff going on and just like haven't been able to like sit down and properly sketch it out. And so I pulled your brains and like looked through even just the basic button thing. It's like, oh, this is amazing. Like the work that it's over in understanding how to sort of just drop new stuff into Storybook is a huge deal. And so even though like I scaffolded the issue up for you, it's like you genuinely did a bunch of work that no one had time to like sit down and figure out. And so we're very thankful for that. It's a huge contribution. And hopefully what this means is it sets us up to have conversations where we can create pull requests that pull in new flows into the Storybook first before we actually pull them into the app itself. And that's sort of the way that we've been thinking about it. So the first thing that will really sort of take advantage of that will be, I think, this update feed. And so we have this new notion of query update in the backend. We have nothing that resembles that in the front end. And so what we'd like to be able to do is schedule updates in the front end, sort of check in on, hey, Query has run updates for you in the background. Can I see those scripts? And just to like give the full lay of the land, an update is Query will just take a transform script inside of your data set or a shell script and just rerun it for you on a schedule. It's basically like a cron job. But what that'll do is Query is smart enough to know, hey, the data didn't change, so we shouldn't create a new version. We'll just create a record of the fact that we checked. And then if we actually do find new data, we'll create a new version of that data set and possibly publish that to the distributed web. And so all of that technology is now landed in the backend, but we have to like figure out a way to make sure that we surface that in a way that's like clear and concise and easy to use and sort of there's a lot of questions about what sort of the first screen should be when we land in query. And so there's, yeah, and I think this is a big conversation that we can now have in the Storybook framework. We can say, cool, I'm going to sketch out this story, and we can then talk as a group about whether or not that's the way we want things to go. So thank you very much, and hopefully that sort of connects how some of these things, how that work is going to be leveraged in the future. Anybody have any questions about that? Cool. Well, anyways, it's very exciting. I'm super pumped about it. But with that, I think we can sort of like, I think the next steps for the Storybook work, I think, are to file some issues around this and say, cool, what things should we discreetly see in Storybook sort of laid out properly, and what components do they touch? And that, I think, hopefully we can get to that sort of later this week, Thursday, Friday time, and just say, cool, let's take a first look at this update feed and what creating a story would look like around it. And that would involve a pull request that would create some new components. And so that'll, hopefully, we'll sort of get that shipped this week. But, or by shipped, I mean issued, filed, not actually shipped. I've got to save that word for releases now. But yeah, I think the next thing on the agenda that is worth sort of making sure that we save some face time to talk through is Windows builds. And Dustin and Jonathan, you guys have been doing a bunch of work on that front here. Dustin, do you want to take over and just sort of talk about what's changed there?
Yeah, sure. So current status is that Windows support is starting to happen. It's currently possible to build, query the back end and the front end, but it's inconvenient and kind of like non-standard to have to like build your own apps from source. So the thing I've been investigating most recently is just like ways we can leverage Electron tools to build like either a single file app or like an installer. Late last week, I finally found a library that let me build just like an example, like installer for like a, Electron Hello World, and I'm going to be integrating that into query. It's called Electron Builder. So I think that'll be the best bet. The one that seems like most supported and just easiest to use. It's going to probably be tricky with how we have the backend running as a separate process within the Electron app, but I mean, we figured that out on OS X, so I'm sure it'll be possible. It's just a matter of figuring out the details of getting it working. But in the meantime, the current way to build the backend also changed due to Go modules and a couple of other changes. So that's all currently documented on the GitHub, and that's where we are. Jonathan has been also working on getting it built on his machine. I believe succeeded late last week, which is cool. So yeah, it's been good getting feedback on like what's missing as far as like instructions go, and how to explain properly like what our situation is.
Yeah, Jonathan, do you have any comments from the process? Because we heard from chat that you actually managed to get things to build okay. But is there anything you want to add to like the wonderful hill that you climbed to sort of get this thing to compile and function?
Yeah, sure. I'm more of a visual learner. I feel like I've always been kind of like that. And so going through this process was a little bit harder for me. And so what I've been trying to do is go and like I just submitted something to the chat, but create a Google Doc with like GIFs that kind of go and do the steps one by one as well. And I'm trying to just work through that and try to get like a working version of query built while going through the steps a little visually. But yeah, Dustin was a huge help in everything, and thanks for putting up with all my questions, because I kept coming back to him a lot. But I'm just trying to like do the step-by-step process in like a animated doc form so people know where to go and what to do and stuff. And the documentation looks amazing now because it's just updated and it has all the links already there, so you can just click and go and get it. And so yeah, I just hope to complete that and then start doing more with the front end, and hopefully this will help out with like Dustin will be able to help out with getting that from me. Yeah. But thanks.
Cool, awesome. Glad to help.
Jonathan, this is amazing. I don't know if anyone else has clicked the link to the Google Doc that he's been working on. Would you mind if we pull requested this into our website as part of our documentation on installing Windows? Or even actually, to be honest, this should probably just go into our Go repository and then link from there. This is incredible. I don't know if you guys are seeing some of these like GIFs on how to do everything. It's like really, really great stuff, John. Yeah, Jonathan, do you have any do you want to work together on getting a PR going on Query to build this thing out?
Yeah, like I definitely want to like have a visual kind of way to look at it and have everything there. And I can't wait to start getting into the front end of stuff because, like I said, once again, I'm kind of more just visual side. The CLI tool was cool, but it's just like, I don't know, it's hard for me to kind of imagine the steps in my mind in a weird way. But I can't wait to get my hands dirty with that as well. And hopefully I want to go this like tutorial route, video and stuff, because that's just kind of how I learn.
Perfect. I think that's amazing. Casey has some plans to record some screencasts over the week, which we're very excited about. I think what we can do is, yeah, so I want to sort of step back for a second and think practically about getting you up and running, Jonathan. It is possible to run Query Connect and then just talk to the web app. And I think we should focus on getting that to function on Windows first, because that will short circuit some of our Electron conversation and let us figure out the Electron builder stuff and sort of get you unblocked so you can see like the front, you can work with the front end. And so just to sort of clarify what that is when we run Query Connect from the command line, one of the things that it does is it spins up a server that can just serve everything that the Electron app can do, but inside of something that can be accessed from inside of a browser. So this is the exact same flow of if you play with Jupyter Notebooks, where it'll make a sort of localhost, whatever. Or actually, I think on Windows, you actually have to type 127.0.0.1 and then a port. But that, I think if we made sure that, like, let's get an issue going on making sure that that flow functions properly on Windows. We've been having a little bit of issue getting, we actually serve the web app files itself as an IPFS hash. And we've been having some trouble getting that pinned as of late, which has caused some issues, but we're hoping to sort of fix that over time. But I think it'd be fun to sort of file two issues here out of this as action items. One being like this GIF-based documentation for installing steps is just incredible. And I'd love to sort of get that in a place. I think both the website and as a markdown file in the Query repo, probably just like a Windows install file. The other thing that I think would be really worth making sure that you are supported in doing, Jonathan, is that you're able to run Query Connect and then visit a browser and sort of actually see the GUI, so that you, because you're a visual learner, let's make sure that you have a working interface that you can sort of play with. And then we can start to iterate from there. And then as the Electron updates land, you can test that as well, which should make things even more sort of one-click installer. Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds good.
Cool. So we'll make sure we get, somebody remind me if I forget, but I'll make a point of filing those two issues. I think both of them will be filed on the Query repo, so query-io/query, because I think they both involve the backend. Even though we're talking about the front end, it's the backend has to serve it. Yes, exactly, Rob. To answer your question from chat, is the web UI shipped as just a reference to a hash? Not only that, it actually does a DNS lookup for the latest version of the web app and gets the hash back and tries to pin that. And so when we change the DNS entry, we have to make sure that that hash is available. And so that's how it works. And it's supposed to be very slick and work very well, but there's theory and then there's practice, and we're working on it. But yeah. Okay, so I think that covers a lot of the high-level agenda items. Did anybody have any questions from the week, from stuff that's going on? I know there's a number of things that are changing, but just wanted to open the floor to anything at all. Like it can be query related, it can be open source development related. Just make sure we got some room to ask questions here. There's no such thing as a silly question.
I guess, like, I think the answer is like there's not really a way to do this right now. But the question, as I've been like slowly finding some time to play more with things, is like, is there any way to explicitly build relationships between like items and data sets, effectively like foreign key type situations, other than the fact that like to create data set B, I loaded the data set A in a transform?
Short answer is no. Yeah, we don't have a way to do that right now. We have a lot of conversations that need to be had around linking schemas together, and I think that's the conversation that you're sort of getting towards. I really want to get there because I think it'll mean that we could do a lot more really interesting symmetric stuff, like that is like kind of the point of where we're edging. We intentionally wanted to, I've been sort of pausing on that conversation a little bit because we think that it should integrate more directly with tools that look a lot like IPLD, which stands for the Interplanetary Linked Data System. But we have some reservations about the way that it's been implemented. And so we have to make some pretty serious decisions that I think should be hashed out as an RFC. And our thinking was we've been sort of making sure that the thing that gets shipped by the end of June, which is the end of our quarter, is the capacity to view diffs of data sets. So can I actually see the difference between the two things on the front end? And which sets us up for a number of things moving forward, and getting this update service out the door were the two like really big sort of technical things we wanted to ship. Over the next 3 months, I think there are two major conversations that need to be started that will take some time to finish. The first is surrounding this: how can I take two data sets and compare their schemas in a way that is meaningful? By meaningful, I mean this like foreign key conversation. This, are these two columns the same thing conversation? That's a really important sort of like thing to be thinking about. And then the other conversation that we should be having, and we need to sort of like just like start the research on, is access control and private data. And so those are the two like big sort of things that we're hoping to kick research off on this summer. And so all of that will be happening over on the RFC repositories. And that the big one around linked data, I think we should probably just file an issue and get started on it now, because it's been something we've been talking about for a while. Just like starting to understand the systems by which that would work there's a lot of existing specifications and existing tools that are trying to tackle this problem. There's the world of JSON LD, which is JSON linked data, which tries to sort of deal with this in some ways. There's schema.org, which is a series of schemas that are trying to decide like what canonically, like what a thing is. Like this is the definition of an event. This is the definition of an artistic creation. And so they go into sort of extreme detail in saying like, this is how you should lay your data out. And so there's that. We need to think about UI around schema, like designing schemas and how we actually sort of link those together. Because we think that's a huge part of this puzzle, is like, if I had some sort of like picker where I could say, oh, I want to put, like as an example, a location, I want to put a lat long point on a map. If I could pick from some menu of sort of models, and one of which is a point on a map, and I can drop that in, and it's, as I'm designing a schema, it's sort of making that easier. It's making it easier for me to create data that is naturally linkable. We think that's a really massive part of this conversation. But there's a lot of, and then obviously the last big animal in this room is something called RDF, which is Resource Description Framework, which is a project that comes from the Semantic Web. Resource Description Framework is trying to sort of do this semantic mapping of relationships between stuff. So it's often referred to as a triple store, which is like subject, predicate, object. So Brendan has a desk, and that's a sort of possessive relationship that RDF tries to map. And so we need to really look at all of these things and understand how query is going to like how much of which we want to support as many of them as possible. And ideally we want to pick the right format that sort of allows us to natively store these things in a way that is stable, rational, and doesn't promise too much. I think every time we wander into the semantic connection conversation, people get really excited to sort of say, oh, well, then that means that I could do all these things. We often forget that data often starts messy and sort of garbagey. And so we need to figure out a way to deal with poor input data, but also really, and be able to upgrade it all the way to being like fully linked. That's a bit of a speech, but Rob, does that remotely answer the question of where we're headed?
Yeah, totally. The other related question I have there, not to take up too much time, is like, in looking at, somebody posted a link to KGBase in the Discord the other day, and I hadn't seen that before, and I was looking at it, got me thinking about, the related question is like, when you're dealing with multiple tables or multiple whatevers that you're trying to link together, if you're making changes that are sort of the same thing in both, like how do you also manage, or have you started to think about how you also manage the fact that like you probably don't want to make two commits, or maybe if you do, you don't want to feel like you do, because it's really like one atomic conceptual change, even though it covers like two data sets or tables or whatever.
Yeah, totally. We haven't talked about this much, but we intentionally designed the dataset document to be a recursive data structure, meaning that the body of a data set can contain other data sets. And we haven't really gotten into that too much. But I think that when we're talking about relational data, in particular tabular relational data, where I have, picture your classic SQL database with a bunch of tables, then it would make total sense to eventually support inside of query, having that be a single data set that has data sets inside of it. And so you can make edits to and collect those tables up into something that has an explicit defined relationship. And that's the number one reason that we always state that all components of a data set are optional, because those sub data sets would not have commits. It would just have a single commit history. And that would sort of let you do a lot of interesting things around collecting data together. That makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. That is super cool. It was 100% unclear to me that that was part of the idea. And I'm curious, is that just part of the idea right now, or does that on some level maybe only in core like work where you can actually have nested data sets that way?
You can do it today. And so, hey, Kelsey, so what you can't do today is you can't get the semantic readers back. And so you don't get the hook that what we need to do is we need to plan an interface for, right now you get an entry reader for a data set body. What would be nice is we have to figure out a way to signify to you when your reader is going to return more readers. So you can totally put it in, and query will be very happy with it, and you could actually simulate the whole system today. You just won't have some of the niceties that we have from the expectation that the top level is itself the data. But yeah, if you look inside of query's document, dataset definition, there's this special key called query. It's like query DS, and query ST and query MD. And we use those in the exact same way that JSON LD uses the $ref to sort of say, this is, I'm a reference to a specific type of thing. That's our signifier to know that, hey, I've iterated down to a thing that is itself a data set. And so we can keep going and know when we encounter that key that something special is supposed to happen. So that's how we plan to do it. We've been thinking about that from the get-go. We have not, we've intentionally sort of left that off as future work. But that's the plan, is because there's a number of systems where this just makes too much sense. The real world examples include traffic data and transportation data. The spec for transportation live updates of the MTA's transit is a series of CSV files, 11 of them that are collected together and fed as a feed. And so you need a way to represent those 11 CSV files as a collection. And that's sort of what we're working on. We've seen this in a number of other places, but ideally you could track that with a single commit history, and you could attach whatever elements you needed to each. And so you could have visualizations for each data set, which allows us to start thinking about data sets that contain multiple visualizations, that kind of thing. But there's lots to do there. Yes, Kelsey, thank you for joining us. And I do have to sort of do a quick shout out to Kelsey, who has been amazing in filing all of these issues over the last week around stuff that we need to fix and clean up. Kelsey, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe make a reference to stuff that you think should get fixed first?
Yeah, so is my audio working? I haven't really used these for microphone. Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm with the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, and I'm filing a ton of issues on Query right now because I just had a call with the Sierra Club last week, and they asked us in March to archive some data they were worried about. There was a big chemical fire in Texas, and it had some air quality monitors around that were recording kind of off the charts benzene levels. During the incident, one of the air quality monitors was taken offline. And so Sierra Club said, hey, wait a minute, they're messing with something. The Texas air quality, the TCEQ, is both responsible for making sure that there's good response to this stuff, but also responsible for providing the data. So they have a lot of motive for this data to not be as public as it currently is. So Edgy, can you come in and make sure that this data is safe? So Rob and Brendan both took part in finding that data and making sure that part of it was saved to the Internet Archive and part of it was saved on Query. And so they just got back in touch with us last week and said, hey, yeah, this could be a really vital thing in a legal case we're currently doing against the Trump administration in terms of apparently they're trying to roll back the requirements for having plans for responding to catastrophic events. And this is like the response apparently to this, and I don't know much about this, so this is all very much secondhand, but the response they had to this fire was not only to take that air quality monitor offline, but they were also, apparently the danger level for benzene is 1 part per billion, but they thought it was 1 part per million. And so they sent workers to the factory next door with no masks, they sent first responders with no masks, and they sent children to school the next day with no masks. And it's very, very likely that they will all get horribly ill and possibly die of cancer from it. So that's really shitty in a lot of ways. And this data, like having a really, really solid record of it, could have a major impact on this case or in a future one up to like 3 to 10 years from now. So it's really important that the Sierra Club, who basically does a lot of this litigation, has this data in a way that they really understand and can verify. And that's where Query comes in. I have a call hopefully this week, but maybe a couple weeks. We don't have it scheduled yet, with some lawyers who are working on this case. And I want to make sure that they can access this data now, but also that they can give it to other people who also might be working on related issues, and that it makes sense for them to download this, process it however they need to, send it to their tech teams and have them process it however they want to, all of that sort of stuff. That's the central piece. And then the secondary part is Sarah, who also works with us. Her area of expertise is in pretty much exactly this sort of stuff, specifically even in Texas. And she wants to do plume modeling of where this, I think it was like 60 miles of chemical plume containing benzene came off of this fire. And so she wants to work with some people on modeling exactly what happened there in order to create more of a report and more context around this, which also would strengthen the case. And then the final one was they used this foam to suppress it that has PFAS in it, which is, she called it like the asbestos of our generation. It is a chemical that cannot be got rid of. They sprayed this foam as a fire suppressant, but it's actually the wrong thing and did not suppress the fire at all. It would have been better to use water. They're worried that perhaps it was done to get rid of this foam, and they used the fire as an excuse, which made it worse. Anyway, there's a lot of just like really bad shit that happened, and this data is really central to it. So basically, I filed all these bugs on UX because I would like for people who aren't really good at, I mean, like definitely not familiar with command line, but also not necessarily familiar with handling data or even navigating interfaces for data, to be able to feel confident about this data existing, the data being definitely the correct data and in a verifiable way. And I explained to her like how content addressing helps make data verifiable. But just, I want them to have something that they can work with and feel good about and feel like they can export to an Excel document and look at numbers.
Okay, that's more serious than any of the other conversations we've been having. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelsey. And yeah, I think I'm hearing, I'm going to keep it pretty concrete because I think that we're in a somewhat time sensitive situation here, not highly, but I think the faster that we can ship updates that make the exact thing that you're talking about. I mean, as an open source project, this is just great. This is really helpful in general. This is stuff that we should be doing and getting better at. And it's nice that we have a reason for doing it. I'm hearing export to Excel, easy check of stuff, and like some basic cleanup that I was seeing from a lot of your issues that you're filing, like get rid of this red repo not found flag and like make things a little, a little cleaner around the edges. And so I think that export to Excel flow is probably the most important one that we can sort of confirm works. Yeah, what else was I gonna say? The other thing that I think is very important is it sounds like we're missing a little bit of documentation around why can I trust this data? Or what does it mean to audit this data? Because the data isn't trustworthy, it's auditable, right? And those are separate things, and we should need to be very careful to sort of walk through, particularly in a legal capacity, where we sort of say everything that we do. Because in the data set that we created, it's also important, not only do we have sort of, there are certain things that Query has, and then there are certain things that aren't in that data set that are worth talking about. So for a lot of things that are archival, you often record, for example, your IP address that made the request. We did not record our IP address with that data, and so it's worth sort of looking at that. But we did do something that we don't normally do, which is that data set is actually signed with a cryptographic key pair, right? And so the data itself actually contains the signature of my machine in it, and so you actually know, okay, I can sort of step forth and say, cool, I made that, and I can attest to having made that. And that script happened and this ran on this day. But I think we need some documentation around sort of clarifying some of these details from the perspective of somebody trying to understand, like high level, not the actual technology side, but the like, why is this auditable? What does it mean that this is auditable? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. And like personally, I feel like a go-between here, because I don't actually know much about the specifics of how your data is stored, and I don't know specifically what's needed to make this data like legally foolproof. So I'm hoping to like facilitate that connection, but I can't even tell you what the specific needs are because the lawyers haven't told me that.
Which is totally fine, because we created the archive and it is what it is, right? And so that we kind of just like, this is the caliber of what it is. I have no problem standing behind it, but there's really, what I think is very important here is this is a great opportunity for us. By operating as a go-between, you can sort of help us make sure that the language that we write is clear and actually sort of like, or as clear as it could be. And also just sort of going through some of the UX stuff that I think we need to clean up anyways.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, in a very literal sense, I know this is trial by fire for you all, but there could be really, yeah, right. There could be some really cool stuff that comes out of this in terms of like, how do you communicate? Like, this is a central piece of why decentralized data storage is valuable, especially with diffing, especially with hashing. If that can be used as a case study, which by the way, they're fine with this being used as a case study. If we can say, hey, this is like all the things that make this legally sound verifiable data, I mean, that'd be like a really cool piece of documentation for the decentralized data movement.
Rob.
So like insofar as like a thing that's really important to Query is verifiability and trust and et cetera. And that also matters a lot here, and that's why like Query is an important application here. This just got me thinking of like a couple really interesting features that might be super valuable to think about, which is finding ways for like multiple entities to collaboratively like sign a data set. So having multiple entities be able to say like, yep, we all ran the script at the same time and got basically the same result. And so that it's not just, right, because at the end of the day, like even if you prove that like this person did create this data set, like it's still how much you trust that person actually like did the work that as stated, that what they uploaded was real, because all you really know is that they did it. And as a related thing, a similar thing with similar value but different approach would be some way of sort of like signing the time that something was seen, right? Because another part of this is like, oh, can you really like you upload this data, but like you didn't go back and doctor it sometime later, or say that this was from like 12 o'clock when it was actually from like 2 days before. Some way of having, I don't think there's a way to do this with the NIST time service, but some way of having an authenticated, like, yep, like some time service received this message and a hash of that, like a signature of that is embedded in the data set to sort of prove that like it was actually committed at that time. Or like short of that, similar to the collaborative signing, like other services or users who could sign off at least that they saw this commit at this time. So, like, oh, it was definitely like done, probably somewhere near the time that it claims to have been done at, or something like that.
Really interesting. Yeah, the timestamp signature is something we should absolutely open up an issue around. I think a lot of this, the way that I've been thinking about this in my head is like with a -- archival flag, like a flag that just like flips on all the switches for make this as verifiable as possible. Like, please record all of the HTTP requests that you made, and like keep and like write down your IP address. And so the archival flag is just leaking more information. So we need to sort of like warn users about what's happening. But in this context, it would have been great to have a flag that's just like, bam, archival. I already think that it is, but it's always helpful to sort of just like pour on more to that sort of story. From the parallelized execution frontier, that is a really, really interesting thing that we should think about, particularly now that we have the capacity to sort of do that across the board. We could actually simulate that right now, right? Rob, if you just cloned a data set that I have and scheduled it to update around the same time, and if we can compare results, right? Again, it's that simple. We could just say, cool, did our bodies produce the same hash? That's a funny phrase. But like, did the dataset bodies end up being the same thing? And we could just coordinate that by being smart about the use of query. We could then think about building that into like some sort of synchronization feature that actually says, hey, we all agree to run this at the same point in time. And if my laptop's closed at that point, then I'm not part of the run, but that could be totally doable. Like when we have every primitive under the sun that we need for that, we have a peer-to-peer network to do the coordination. We have a scheduler that's registered with the cron daemon, and we can talk to that. And we have a way to verify who's saying what, and sort of saying, cool, I will accept that request, and I won't accept that other request. Okay, this is a lot. This is really interesting.
I was going to say too that there's two parts of it, right? And like what Rob was talking about is very much on the realm of like genuinely authenticable data. But then there's the other part, which is more what my issues have been on, which is users being confident about it. And that's definitely much more something I can work on. And Ramfox, I don't know your real name, but I've seen you on GitHub. But I'm happy to work with you continuing on the GitHub issues, but also on calls if that's easier. Hi, Casey.
That sounds delightful. And actually, you missed James is helping a bunch on our front end stuff with Storybook to try and help sort of clean up a bunch of things. So we even have some better primitives for having those conversations now, which is really exciting. This is really cool. I got to say, I'm really pumped to like do this work and make this more usable and make it more easy, like spreadsheet exportable, understandable. That to me is really important, and I think we should strive for that on a number of frontiers. I think every issue we've talked about today sort of somehow talks about getting the front end to work more cleanly. Rico, did you have something, or were you scratching your ear? No, it's good ear scratch. Okay, cool. Okay, so I think we have a lot of action items that have come out of this. I'm gonna have to go back to the recording and actually write them down. But does anybody have any closing questions? We need the last 10 minutes, but other than that, I think this is lots to do. Very cool. I just, once again, I have to say a huge thank you, everybody, for joining the call. This is really appreciated. It's really nice everybody join, and anything that we can do to help you be better open source humans, please let us know. And hopefully you can help us do the same. And yeah, this has been really neat.
Let's call yet.
Yeah. Cool. Well, then with that, I think we can call it draw to a close. Thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you, if you want to join the using query call, that's next week. And then the next dev call will be in 2 weeks. Using query is mainly around building data sets. And so if you have any kind of data sets you'd like to build or play with, that's the time to have that chat. And with that in mind, I'll chat with you all on the internet and in the future.
Bye.
Bye.